Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine this as a dry erase board. And I want you to imagine written onto it the words, "shot in the back on the ground." It says that because that's what happened to my client, Robert Ramirez. Robert was shot in his back while he was getting up off of the ground by the defendant, Officer Waldman. That's not good. That doesn't sound good. And I'm sure you're wondering, how did that happen? How did Robert get shot in the back? Why did Robert get shot in the back? Well, let me tell you a little bit about the situation. And let me tell you a little bit about Robert. You see, Robert's married. He's married to his high school sweetheart, Maria. And they've got a 7-year-old son, Robert Jr. Robert's a carpenter by trade, and he's a good one. And he's got good friends, and previous to this, he had good health. Somewhat of an athlete. But that all changed. This happened on a Friday. And like most people on Friday, Mr. Ramirez did what anybody would do. He wanted to spend it with friends. He wanted to relax, have fun. So, having worked a long week, he went over to a friend's house. And they did exactly that. They had a good time. They played card games. They talked. They enjoyed each other's company. And Robert had brought a 6-pack of beer. And they watched the NBA television game. And Robert and his friend Louis and Joseph shared drinks and enjoyed their time away from work. But at some point they realized the evening was young. They had time. And it was Friday. It was time to live it up. So they went out on the town. And they did have a good time there as well. But at some point, it did get late. It was late, and it wasn't Friday anymore. Now it's actually Saturday. The early morning hours of Saturday morning, December 7th. So they knew it was time to go home. But they wanted to have one last event to kind of end on a high note. So the 3 friends drove to a local park. And they had a good old-fashioned foot race. And Robert won the foot race. And keep in mind, Robert's 26 at the time. He's a young guy. You know, he's spry. So on that high note, feeling great, Robert heads home. But Robert never gets home. Because as he travels northbound on California Avenue, he comes across a very slow-moving vehicle. A vehicle going so slow. A vehicle going 5 miles per hour. Now, Robert does what anybody would do. Got a bad driver in front of you, honks his horn, signals, merges left. He's going to get past this guy and be on his way. The vehicle doesn't let Robert pass. It merges into his lane. Robert's irritated now. You know, this ain't no bad driver. This is a jerk. Cut me off. Robert tries again. Honks his horn, signals, gets over to the left lane, and attempts to pass. And again, the vehicle prevents him from doing so. Now, what Robert couldn't have known is that this vehicle was occupied by 2 police officers. It was occupied by the defendant, Officer Waldman, and his partner, Officer Levy. You see, Robert couldn't have known that because the vehicle wasn't marked. He couldn't have known that because neither the defendant or his partner were wearing police uniforms. And so as this situation develops, and the 2 vehicles are going along, they turn off onto Evergreen Avenue. And they stop. And the windows are down, and now Robert has his chance to give this other driver a piece of his mind. So he yells at him. Yells at him for not signaling. Yells at him for not getting out of the way. And Officer Levy, the driver of that vehicle, gets out of his car. Robert's, unsure of his intentions or what Morris Levy's intentions might be. So he gets out of his car. Robert gets out. Now both men are at the front of their vehicles exchanging words about bad driving habits. That's not good enough for Officer Levy. You see, it's at this point that Officer Levy punches my client in the face and starts a fight. Robert, defending himself, is now in a struggle. And so the 2 men as they fight, work their way to the back of that patrol vehicle. And it's there again that Officer Levy punches my client in the stomach, causing him to fall to the ground and hit his head on that rear bumper. Doesn't feel good. Officer Levy's got an advantage now. He's got somebody on the ground, and he takes advantage. He gets on top of my client. And it's for the first time that he identifies himself and says, "Police." Robert is shocked. "Police? Is this how the police behave?" Stops resisting, shows his hands. Realizing who he might be dealing with, he asks for identification. But Robert doesn't get any identification because what he does get is the defendant getting out of his side of the patrol vehicle, coming around the back, and shooting my client in his back. Shot on the ground in the back. Now, opposing counsel may get up here and say, there was a knife. Oh, the whole thing's justified. Perfectly reasonable explanation. But what you're not going to hear, you're not going to hear any fingerprints found on that knife. You're not going to hear, and that's weird, right? Hold a knife, should be fingerprints. You're not going to hear about any blood on that knife. Well, that's weird. You stab somebody, there should be blood on the knife. What you are going to hear is that Robert's a carpenter, and he owns knives. But the knife that they have is not the knife a carpenter uses. In fact, Robert's never seen that knife before. He doesn't own it. You know, what happens is a tragedy. Robert suffered because of it. You're going to hear about what it was like for him to go to the hospital, have to go through treatment, miss work. You're going to hear about how he used to play basketball with his son. He used to be on a softball league. And how you'll hear again, moments before all this happened, Robert, in the prime of his youth, won a foot race. What happened to Robert, it's not good. It's wrong. So I'm asking you today, help make this right for Robert.